Welcome back to the Aggression in Dogs Conference. All of the talks are pre-recorded and played right here on the main stage. If you're having technical issues with the live presentation, a YouTube link will be provided in the chat box where you can watch the presentation in another browser window. Professional closed captioning is available by clicking on the CC button at the bottom of your video window. If you experience any other tech issues during the live presentation, please visit the info desk in the lobby or drop a question in the chat box. Information about continuing education credits, as well as a link to download PDFs of the presentation slides, can be found at the info desk as well. Stick around for Q&A time right after, also here on the main stage. And just so you're aware, there will be a slight delay of about a minute or so between the presentation and the Q&A session. If you have any questions for me, please enter them into the Q&A box so I can see them outside of the chat box. We also have lots of prizes to give away. If you're attending the conference live, you can earn points for that contest by engaging in activities such as visiting our amazing exhibit hall. And I want to give a very special thanks to my conference partner, Joanne Rec Team, who has worked tirelessly to make this conference happen. I can't thank her enough and truly am grateful to have teamed up with her. Thank you, Joanne. And now on to my talk on troubleshooting in aggression cases. Hope you enjoy. This presentation is on troubleshooting difficult scenarios in aggression cases. The whole talk came about when I was asking my students, what are some of the most difficult scenarios you face in your aggression cases? And this was in the Facebook group, and they started listing a whole bunch of different things. So I kind of picked the top 7 out of that would fit into about an hour talk. And so let's jump right into those. So the first one is the dogs that, the client tells you it just happened out of the blue. The dog was fine with the people. They've been able to come over maybe multiple times. They're able to walk around the home and pet the dog. But for some reason, the dog's becoming more aggressive towards people it knows or strangers. And let's just say we rule out some of the other typical issues where we see there. So we might see dogs that have new health or issues or something that is causing a sudden change in behavior. Anytime you have that, you're usually looking at health. So let's say we rule that out. We rule out social maturity, rule out some of the typical issues we'd see. Then we're trying to figure out, we're trying to problem solve here. Why is the dog suddenly displaying these aggressive behaviors towards people it knows? Let's say we rule out conflict as well. So sometimes you have dogs that are okay with people, but not really okay with them. So the dog is still somewhat fearful of those people, or is trying to avoid them, or has a negative association with a particular person, and then that person gets too close. So it may feel like it's out of the blue, but it's actually, again, a dog that's conflicted about that person being there. So let's say we rule out all of those cases, and we got a dog that truly is just showing this new aggressive behavior towards people. Now, one of the things that can happen sometimes is something called stimulus generalization. So A.C. Catania describes stimulus generalization as occurring when the same behavior is evoked by similar but not identical antecedents. So a good example of that is, like, say somebody gets bitten by a snake, a certain type of snake or color of snake. Next thing you know, they're afraid of all snakes. They're just worried about all snakes, even though it's just one type of snake that might have bitten them. And that's called stimulus generalization. You start to assume that all snakes are going to bite you. So dogs can sometimes do the same if there's some sort of negative incident with a particular person, especially if it's in a certain context. So let's jump a little bit more into a sample case here. So let's say this is an actual client I had, a 2-year-old Great Pyrenees, okay? And it was described as great with people when introduced sitting on the patio. So that's how they always did the introductions. They would, or the people would be able to come in the home and sit down. The dog would be brought out and would be loving them up, licking them, very happy to see them, affiliative behavior, no problems there. And they were able to get up and move around the house and things like that. No issues there. And then the client commented, we just started having these issues when people would come through the gate. And it started to escalate. Dog would bark, and dog would have issues with people coming through the gate. And it started to transfer to just strangers, then friends, and then family members. Anybody coming through that gate was going to be a problem for this dog. So we're starting to see some stimulus generalization happen there. Now, what else could be going on there? And it's kind of popping out at you, I'm sure, as you're looking at this slide. So just a brief reminder about breed-specific tendencies. So again, Kim talked about how ethology matters in aggression cases, certainly for behavior in aggression cases. That behavioral phenotype is something to always pay attention to. So, because breed traits they're really ripe targets for stimulus generalization. So another example, so this is actually a great picture. I was going to try to Photoshop some human heads over the sheep, but it just didn't look right. But that's what you can see sometimes when you have a livestock guarding dog that starts to protect the home, the property, their flock, or the family members. And you might see that pop out in some cases. We see it often, again, in times I see it, many herding dogs in the home. The owner reports that their friend was over and they tried to get up from the couch and go to the bathroom or something, and that's when the dog went after them, bit them in the calf or the ankle or the rear end sometimes. And that's, again, some of the breed-specific tendencies that we might see pop out. And then if you combine that with stimulus generalization, then you often get these incidents where it's just happening in one or several different contexts, but it's always very specific antecedent arrangements in those cases. So what do we do there? If it's not a fear issue and we've got a breed-specific behavior that's generalized to a certain location or certain context, that can be tricky for some owners to grasp onto because they don't understand why it only happens in that context. So a lot of our job as consultants is to explain why it's happening in particular contexts and sort of what the underlying motivations are for that behavior. So my strategy is management first. So of course, with all aggression cases, we are focusing on management. Very important for any undesirable behavior. It's with aggression cases, it becomes even more important to manage behavior, meaning preventing rehearsal of it. And then with this particular type of case, it is extremely important to prevent rehearsal of that behavior because it's highly reinforcing for that animal to practice that. Self-reinforcing in a sense. So my job is to first look at that picture and making sure we can manage it. Now, when we are managing, let's say in this case with the Great Pyrenees, of course, we can't give the dog free access to the gate area or even in the yard. It's got to be supervised, managed, somehow either on leash with the owner in the house, you name it, the type of management you want to put in place. But it's really important to do that to, again, prevent rehearsal of that behavior. So the next step I take, so again, I'm going back to the other types of cases. Let's say it's an underlying medical issue or pain issue that the dog is having, or the dog is fearful. Typically, we're going with our straight desensitization and counter-conditioning strategies. We're trying to change the association for the dog. We're trying to resolve the pain issues, those kind of things that we'll see in more of the typical cases. This kind of case, though, we've got to do a lot more giving the dog direction. So again, going back to breed-specific tendencies, if we don't give the dog some direction, it's going to be a problem in the long run because the dog's going to just choose to go back to, this is what I was bred for many generations, and I'm going to start exhibiting this behavior very easily. So I'm often very focused on, let's teach this dog something, proactive cueing in giving the dog direction. So if it is the border collie that is jumping off the couch to go after your friend that just got off the couch that the dog was totally fine with the whole time the person was there, we need to proactively give that dog another job. So we replace the behavior of going after the person with something else. And that's also another reason why we want alternative enrichment and activities for these dogs. If we take away their ability to sort of act out on what they have been purpose bred to do, we might develop those maladaptive behaviors, which often is the case in many of these aggression cases. So giving the dog a different task, something that's going to satisfy some of that working need or some of that desire to do a particular task, we need to replace that with some other activity. So in the Great Pyrenees case, one of the things I did was just first establishing a good recall. So the dog was still allowed in the yard in a sense to protect the territory in the sense of dogs announcing when somebody's arriving. But much of it fell back on the owner, of course, educating them that the dog's going to do that anyways. It's something, you're not going to get rid of that per se. You're not going to completely extinguish that behavior. It's going to come naturally to the dog. So it wouldn't be realistic to say, never bark again, never patrol the fence line. However, we should be giving that dog direction with proactive cueing. And in this case, I said, let's get the dog to recall when they announce somebody's arrival. So we'll say, thanks for letting me know somebody's there. Come over to me check in with me. Now we're going to give you an alternative activity to do, some training exercises, stationing behavior. All of those things we're proactively asking the dog to do after they make the announcement of their arrival. And of course, putting other management strategies in place, lock on the gate, preventing free access to the gate to prevent any problems or mistakes from happening in the future. So that's this type of case. Let's move on to the next one, which is muzzling. So what about the dogs that can't muzzle because either they have some negative association or handling issues? They will bite when they even see a muzzle. I'm sure some of you have experienced this or the dog shuts down. You put a muzzle on and they freeze and they don't move. Their head lowers and they don't move at all. And we've seen those cases as well. So muzzling can be very difficult for some dogs if they've had negative experiences with them. So let's talk about some of the things we might typically see. Handling issues. Dogs that you try to, and this doesn't even have to be a muzzle. You could be trying to pet them, touch their ears, try to put a collar on. Those are typical what we call handling issues where the dog just has a negative experience or some pain or something that has created the experience for them that any hands reaching around this area is a bad thing and they're going to become defensive about it. So we are trying to undo that with some of the techniques we're going to talk about. Previous negative associations with muzzling. So I always tell my students, one of the worst things you can do is put a muzzle on a dog right before the scary guy comes over to show up or right before some negative experience. The dog's going to really quickly learn that, oh, anytime this muzzle goes on, something scary is about to happen. And what happens is you try to go put the muzzle on the next time, the dog's like, nope, you're not coming anywhere near me with that thing because that negative association's been built. So we have to undo that quite a bit sometimes. And then what about the dogs that resource guard their muzzle? We've maybe done some things to do some nice muzzle acclimation. So we've put peanut butter or spray cheese in the muzzle, which works for most dogs. So I'm not saying not to do that. You just have to be careful with the resource guarding dogs. Dogs that have a history of guarding a food type of item can sometimes start to guard their muzzle, especially if there's some residual cheese and it's on the dog's face. You're risking the dog potentially guarding that, even when the dog is wearing it. So let's talk about some solutions for these things. So for handling issues, again, dogs that don't like anybody reaching or even putting a collar on, it can be very difficult to put a muzzle on because there's a lot of parts to that. So if we're trying to put on the neck strap with a buckle and then the head strap, we're fiddling around a lot with their face and you might get an aggressive response. So first rule of thumb for anytime you're having muzzling issues, switch the type of muzzle because oftentimes you're going to get a fresh start with that. Not all the time because some dogs figure out that anything that's going to their face is a bad thing. But if you start out with a new style, and I recommend changing the material, whether it's if you've got rubber, switch to maybe biothane or even a metal muzzle. That can be helpful. Switch the color, switch the shape, kind of do as much of a contrast as you can with the new muzzle, but don't put it anywhere near the dog's face at first. We're going to make the new muzzle this really super awesome toy, new Kong toy or new thing in the dog's life that hasn't been put anywhere near the dog's face at first. It's really important. So the dog should always move towards the muzzle because we want that consent. We want them saying, okay, I can do this, not you're going to put that muzzle on my face. It should be always voluntary. So the dog is constantly moving towards the muzzle versus me trying to reach towards the dog. Very, very important. To help handlers that have that muscle memory of wanting to move towards the dog, I recommend attaching the muzzle to the wall, a kennel, or a crate. And you can see in that picture from the Muzzle Up project, there's a 3M, just sort of the same thing you would hang a painting with, and so you don't nail holes in your wall. You can use that to secure the muzzle to the wall, and it just becomes like this makeshift muzzle holder. I kind of like that. I also used to do the muzzle in the box idea, which holds the muzzle in a food bowl, which can work well too. And you can certainly still do that. I do like the muzzle in the wall because it makes targeting much easier for the dog. And they can also kind of see what's going around if they're able to target straight forward versus down. So you can do that inside of for you folks in the shelter world, you can do that in a shelter kennel where attached kind of to the kennel door. You can do it with crates, really anything that's going to secure the muzzle in that kind of position there. The one little thing I recommend also is hand protection, using something on your hands such as Kevlar gloves or even lighter protection. And the reason why is because with dogs that have had issues with muzzles, or have bitten for handling issues, there's always the risk of still getting bitten because you're working in close proximity with the dog. So when you get to the stages of, putting the neck strap on or putting the head strap on, there's those little moments of still, it can be risky for you. So what hand protection does is mitigates that risk, gives you a little bit of an insurance layer from a bite. And I find that a lot of my clients that have issues with dogs that they have kind of nervousness themselves, so their movements are hesitant, or they're a little bit worried about taking next steps, the hand protection allows them to feel a little bit more confident with handling their dog and less hesitant in their movements. So of course you want to desensitize the dog to seeing gloves on your hands or anything strange like that. So this next video is going to show you a really brilliant technique from Alexis Torriello, where she's got a very thin slip lead, and it allows you to attach the neck strap without ever going near the dog's neck. So I'll let the video explain that.
Yeah. Really. Alright, there we go. See if we can let the top strap go. Maybe, see, so what you would do now is you would take the top strap and put it through the buckle with the teeth. He's really he's pushing his own head.
Like this, right?
Yeah,
but I can't. This is.
Okay, nice. Alright, let's let it go then. That's perfect. Beautiful.
Good job.
Nice.
Thank you, Scotchuch.
Alright, so
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you can see some really nice handling techniques, some coaching. You can see that the process is working. And they're also doing some counter conditioning in there by using the food. Here's another, so let's talk about resource guarders next. Dogs that actually guard their muzzles now. Again, switch the type of muzzle, because if that previous muzzle, it's like the one favorite toy or the one Kong toy you have in your house. When you're starting a resource guarding protocol, you usually don't start with that high value object. You start with something lower value. So why not do the same with muzzles? Get a brand new muzzle, different association for that dog. Check your order of events, and what that means is what order the muzzle and then the appetitive stimulus, the food, happens. Because if I start putting food inside a muzzle, it can work really well because the dog's learning that the food happens in the muzzle and they're more likely to stick their muzzle in there. But for resource guarders, the issue with smearables, or things that are going to be inside the muzzle, is it's just like you've given them a Kong toy and they're looking out of there. So once the muzzle's in their possession, meaning it's on their face, because possession is 9/10 of the law most of the time in resource guarding cases. If the dog has possession of it, meaning they now have it near them or they're closer to that resource, they're much more likely to guard that. And that's the difference between when I'm holding a muzzle, or I'm feeding out of a food bowl, or I'm holding the bone that the dog is chewing. It's more cooperative, so we're helping, in a sense, the dog eat that resource, but we're also in possession of it. So you gotta be really careful. Once that muzzle leaves your hands and you try to go reach for it or adjust it, there's a likelihood for aggression to happen because the dog's simply just guarding something of value. So additional tips is to make sure you go back to good conditioning in terms of the dog is voluntarily approaching the muzzle, putting their nose in there, you click, and then reinforce outside the muzzle. So reinforce with a small treat, and it should be something easily consumable, meaning once they eat it, it's gone, so it's no longer in the picture. So I prefer small bits of non-crumbly, high-value treats for this versus the spray cheese or the peanut butter for resource guarding cases. Now you can go a step further. I'm going to play this next video for you where you can do some protected contact, meaning you set a back tie on the dog, and that prevents them. So for your severe cases where the dog, you've had some real issues with muzzling, and you still need something to protect yourself, and the dog's not muzzled yet, we're going to do some other layers of protected contact. So back tie is one way you can do this, where you've got a leash, and you can see in the picture here, I've got a leash kind of attached to the door handle on the other side, and working with the dog just out of range. So if she theoretically could still bite me on the hand if I'm working that close, but a sustained attack is not going to be possible because all you have to do is just scoot back a little bit, and the dog won't physically be able to get to you. Now, you may, in addition, use gloves for an additional layer of safety. I mean, you can go all the way up to wearing Kevlar pants and gloves and everything else to keep yourself safe, depending on the severity of the case. Now, in this case, I've got food. I'm feeding through the muzzle, so this is my own dog, Castagna. She's not a resource guarder, so I'm just demonstrating how the back tie works. So don't do this with resource guarding dogs. This just demonstrates the technique of the back tie. All right, moving on here. What about the double whammy? So dogs that have aggression issues and separation anxiety issues. So two of the most difficult things many owners can be faced with their dogs. Two of the toughest cases sometimes. Dogs that are destructive in their home or self-injurious or panicking when the owners leave or the other dog is separated from them, and the dog is aggressive towards something in the environment. So the people in the home or visitors, or the other dog that they have separation anxiety with. Really tough cases, because what do you do? What do you start with in those cases? So let's talk about that. So this first one is about separation anxiety from other dogs in the house. And what could be tougher than that? Let's say the two dogs fight sometimes, but when they're not together, they have real severe separation anxiety. One or both maybe have separation anxiety, so they're destructive, they're whining, they're pacing, they're having a difficult time when the other dog's not near them, but sometimes they fight. Really tricky cases because we've got to figure out how to manage that well. So I always start with really good history taking, uncovering why the dogs are fighting in the first place. And once you determine why the dogs are fighting, you're then going to be able to manage things much more and uncover the antecedent arrangements for why those dogs are fighting, the underlying motivations for those dogs fighting. So first and foremost in these cases, I'm looking at why the dog's fighting in the first place. And generally, you're able to unravel the reason for the dogs fighting and the context in which it happens, so that way we can manage around them. Because we can't just say completely separate your dogs, because that could be extremely detrimental to the behavior plan, both from the separation anxiety standpoint and that anxiety fueling potentially the aggressive behavior. So determine why the dogs are fighting. Most of the time it's resources. And in this case, this video, I'm going to show you the resources, Jess, the owner of these dogs. And what do you do there? Like if the dogs have separation anxiety from each other, how would you separate them if the owner's the resource, but also the one that they're fighting over? So management solutions are really important. I love exercise pens for this reason, because you can separate homes in a way that the dogs can still see each other, often even just lay down next to each other around the resource as we're working through the behavior change strategy. So of course we need to address the aggression, the aggressive behavior, and the reason for the conflicts. But sometimes you have to do that safely without encountering the separation anxiety component. So I'll play this video for you. You can just kind of see the setup that she's got there to safely work with these dogs. So she's teaching the smaller dog that's on the same side with her, that's Pedro, to just remain on station, just notice the other dog approaching, which was formerly a trigger for the conflicts, and just stay put. So we're teaching a nice alternative replacement behavior there, and we're working on counter conditioning at the same time. So you can see she's got the exercise pen, a really nice long one. She's out in Australia, so they have kind of different products out there. But it splits her whole living room in half. This really wide open space too, where she can safely work with the dogs without them being able to get to each other in that particular context. Where and actually sitting on the furniture was the most difficult scenario for her. So she's done a wonderful job with those dogs. What about dogs that have separation anxiety from people? So we've got to juggle that component, and having, that's a tough thing for people to deal with just on its own. And then when you add aggression in there, there's a lot to juggle. So what do you start with there? How do you address that? So we'll talk more about that in a second. And then when you have anxiety as or fear, phobia, of which separation anxiety surrounds, that can fuel the aggressive behavior in many other contexts. So it's the whole argument, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, or is it the meds? And we'll talk about meds in a second. But let me just jump back to why I love exercise pens so much, except for when this happens. So I always give a little side note. When you're doing management in aggression cases, you got to check to make sure it's going to work out well. But especially in separation anxiety cases, the dogs will often figure out ways around management because of that separation anxiety issue. All right, so what do we do? What are the solutions for these separation anxiety aggression cases? Team approaches. Really, really important. I work with aggression, of course. My partner works with separation anxiety. So I wouldn't be able to specialize or know much about the separation anxiety because I don't work with it often. She does. She exclusively focuses on that, and I focus exclusively on aggression. So sometimes we need to work as a team. Or you can, if you don't have somebody that you can look for a CSAT, Certified Separation Anxiety Trainer, or a board-certified veterinary behaviorist to bring in the med component. And oftentimes with separation anxiety or aggression cases, of course, we're talking to folks like Dr. Amy Pike about the medical side of things and bringing in medication that can help. It really requires a team effort. Now you have to triage what's most important for the dog. And of course, the clients are usually, in my cases, the clients are more focused on the aggression, right? They're worried about the dog biting somebody. The dog's just bitten somebody. The dog's just got in a fight. That's much more shocking to most people than the dog panicking in the home. So they will see the panic in the home. Sometimes they'll come home, they'll find things destroyed. They might see something that's happened, but most of the times not the major priority. It's the aggression. And sometimes that's not the right order of things to address. We have to address the separation anxiety because it's such a fuel for aggressive behavior in other contexts, because the dog is so stressed. So there's this chronic cycle of stress going on for the dog because of their separation anxiety, which affects my side of the coin on addressing the aggression. So sometimes it's a conversation we need to have with clients about what do we address first and why it matters to address that particular issue first, because it has such a bearing on the case with the aggression. So if you're going to focus on one thing, it's got to be team effort, really focusing on the core roots of the problem sometimes. So you often have to help out with scheduled management. And what that is how can we help this client manage all of those scenarios in which separation anxiety and or aggression might happen. I had a perfect case of this with a couple. They had a nanny that the dog was aggressive to, but the dog also had separation anxiety from the mom, the dad, and their baby. So the dog couldn't be away from any of those three family members, but also had issues with the nanny coming over. So what do you do with the dog? Can't put it away in a room when the nanny's over. Can't just take it and, nobody's, just the nanny in the home with the dog. So we had to get really creative with management strategies. Dog going to dog daycare one day, dog going to stay at the parents' house one day while the owners are at work. And one of the best things we can do as trainers and consultants is really helping them figure that out, because it's overwhelming at first. They don't have any solutions. They don't know where to turn. So we sometimes just helping them create that schedule can be just as important as management and teaching them about safety and body language and training skills and all the other things we do. Sometimes it's really important just to jump in and say, these are additional solutions for your case to make life easier for everybody right now while we focus on what's most important in your case. So, all right, so that's separation anxiety type cases, double whammy cases. Let's jump into my next favorite topic here, generalized guarding in dogs. So when I define generalized guarding, it just means the dog starts to guard everything. So somebody drops a paper towel, the dog's like, well, I'm going to guard that because it fell on the floor. Or the owner starts reaching for something like their shoe on the floor, and the dog's never guarded that item before, but because the owner's going to go pick it up, the dog's like, that looks worth guarding because you're going to go pick it up. So generalized, it starts to happen with everything, with the toys, the food, the bones, the resting spots, the people, the toilet balls, which I've had happen in some cases. So it generalizes, starts to become a real problem, obviously, for many owners. So why does it happen? It happens because of classical conditioning, the power of classical conditioning. So just play this fun video for you first, just so you can see how much. This one is more of a good example of stimulus discrimination. So dogs can be really good about picking up on what matters to them in the environment. Now here is, so some of the things I again focus on are what are the precursors? And let's talk about that. How does it become generalized? And oftentimes, sometimes I see it in the cases where the dog steals something, and the owners, of course, don't want the dog to have that. So it's a sock, or maybe the dog swallowed things in the past, so the owner's just trying to get it away quickly, or the owner finds it disgusting, and the dog gets in the trash and grabs like a used Kleenex, or something like that. And we start to add value inadvertently to those objects because we chase the dog down and be like, give me that and leave it, bad dog, or no, leave it, and all those things happen. So the dog starts to learn, well, this must be really valuable, and they were really not nice to me last time I had this, so it starts to add more value, make things much more worse in those cases. So then it starts to generalize to just that stimulus of somebody reaching down to grab something. Looks very similar to somebody reaching down to grab something out of the dog's mouth. And if you think about handling issues too, it also happens with owners that have to grab the dog's collar to grab something out of the dog's mouth. Now the dogs learn that sometimes when somebody grabs my collar, something bad is going to happen. So really, those things can start to generalize many different stimuli that the dog thinks something about bad is about to happen. What about safe zone guarding? So sometimes in cases where we start to see dogs guard a particular area because that's the safest place with the least amount of resources. So it's gotten so bad in some cases where the owner's like, all right, we're just going to keep him in a safe zone. He can eat in there. He can have his toys in there. And we're adding value to that area, and the dog starts to guard it more. So what do we do there? And what I typically say is, if you're going to have a safe zone, we'll keep it the safe zone, but you have to have procedures in the sense of allowing, getting the dog in and out of that safe zone without incidents. So sometimes I recommend making sure that the person doesn't go into that safe zone anytime they're letting the dog out. We just open the door and just let the dog out. We might add in counter conditioning strategies there, where we approach, throw treats, walk away, approach, throw treats, walk away into the safe zone while the dog's there, and try to condition the dog that when we approach the gate, you can come out. But you've got to take real small steps there, because if you have a generalized guarder, chances are it's going to be very difficult when you've got that safe zone guarding. And then one of the other things I see is tricking the dog. So owners will do something to get the dog away from something by showing food. Okay, here's your little piece of kibble. Here's your little broken off, low value chunk of milk bone. Come get it, so then I can get that higher value object away. that's where it also starts to generalize. It can generalize very easily. So here's a video, good video of how we can create a generalized resource card, a really good video of example of it.
Hey Quincy, is it okay if I have my protein? You don't even lift, buddy, so I'm going to take it. Hey Quincy, is it okay if I take my deodorant stick, my arm? Hey Quincy, is it okay if I get my key? I'm going to be late for work. Hey Quincy, is it okay if I take one of my socks, please? You don't pay for these, I do, and you've been sitting in them all day, so I'm going to take it right now. Come on. Hey Quincy, is it okay if I have the toilet paper, please? Hey Quincy, is it okay if I have my blanket, please? I'm really cold, so I need my blanket. Hey Quincy, is it okay if I grab my lottery ticket? I think it's a winner, so I'm going. Hey Quincy, is it okay if I just grab this book right here? And you'll be nice, because it says how to be a gentleman, so you. Get him!
All right, so obviously I don't advocate doing that with dogs, but it's such a good example of what can happen when guarding starts to generalize based on what people are doing. So, what are solutions here for this? I'll move my picture over so you can see this dog. Solutions for generalized guarding. So what do we do? So first step is to triage what the dog finds resources. Make a list of all the things the dog can find resource as value. Obviously, we have to manage those, and we have to be careful about where we are in relation to the dog, even if we don't think the dog is guarding it, because they might suspect if we reach down for our sneakers. So that can be an exhaustive list sometimes. It can be many, many, many things. So, but it's important to create that list so we're aware of it, so we can either manage those particular objects or be aware of it when we're working around the dog. So then you have to make a list of antecedents that the dog also displays aggression towards because of the generalized guarding. So is it reaching down? Is it something we say? You have seen cases where it's just simple as, what do you got there? What do you have? That is an antecedent for the dog to say, they're going to come over and try to get this from me again, so I'm going to guard it. So we have to make a list of all of those things. It can be as subtle as just how the owner looks at the dog. A little kind of look of like this disparity sort of that triggers the dog to actually say, oh, there they go again. That means they're coming after me. So really, really difficult. And if you've got a huge list of antecedents, but we can work around those things. So just like any other case where you've got a multiple list of triggers for that dog, we start with one. We start with one, start to add in, get the dog successful around one particular resource or one particular stimulus, and reverse engineer that generalization, right? We start with one and we start to push back the other side. We're going to say, okay, let's get this dog to generalize that these things are good and not bad when we present those stimuli. So I might start with barely reaching down towards a sneaker or something, counter condition that, reinforce the dog for doing any other behavior, looking away when I do that. And then of course add in the classical counter conditioning. A treat happens when I do this. Treat happens when I do this. I'm going to reach down and toss you a treat. Safety, of course, always in play. So as you go along, then you start to add in more of those antecedents. You start to add in, keep adding in those things until you start to see those conditioned emotional responses we're looking for. Start off with one, but oftentimes you'll start to see it carry over. And I have this really great case too. I think I have some video clips and some of my other presentations where the dog was really guarding a bunch of different things, but once that first nice tail wag, happy response happened after the owners had practiced a few days at this, they got it. They're like, oh, that's what we're looking for. So now we're going to start to look for that in every other context. And then when you're getting there, you know you're making great progress in that case. Okay, moving on here. Number 5. What about aggression towards one owner in the home, or maybe multiple owners, but they live in the home with the dog? So think about that. We've seen a lot of this during the pandemic. Newly adopted dogs, they get bonded to one owner, start either guarding that owner or start going after just one person that they have issues with. Maybe they're fearful of a particular person in the home. So it can be very tricky because they're living together 24/7, especially now. Many people are home much more. They're working from home, so the dog has constant exposure to that stimulus where it can be very stressful, not only for the dog, but for everybody involved. So first thing to pay attention to is the safe zones, meaning safe for both the human and the dog. Think about the emotional toll this plays. Somebody, especially people that just got a dog, and they're like, all right, we've got this dog to help us through the stressful time of the pandemic, and now the dog's coming after me. So like, what else can happen in 2020, right? And it can really have an impact. It's very difficult in regards to the human-animal bond if only one person has that human-animal bond and the other person might be afraid. So we do have to consider and be empathetic with the client on that, but also consider the human side of the equation. And sometimes I'm having discussions, is it reasonable to keep this dog in the home? Especially if it's a serious risk to the well-being of one of the people in the home. So one of the ways, though, to start is to have safe zones. One place for the dog to be, one place for the owner to be, or be able to move around in at least freely without coming in contact with each other, to avoid rehearsal of the behavior and to mitigate the amount of stress in that environment. So obviously you're going to see a lot of counter conditioning. Again, I've got video coming up next of this process, but it's a lot of it is just the dog learning that that person's safe, that that person predicts good things, and those two things need to really happen. The person has to be safe, because you can do all of the treat tossing in the world, but if your environment is not set correctly, where that dog is still feeling threatened by that other person in the home, simply because they have to get up and like go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and the dog just is close enough in another room or something to feel that that's a threat, that's going to undo most of the work you're doing during the day to try to make that person feel safe for the dog. So one of the things I do, I add in what's called reinforcement stations. There should be ample opportunities to reinforce and to create positive associations with that person. Because if we don't have the environment set correctly for the human to succeed, we can't expect much to happen. So I have lots of treat stations around the house, out of the dog's reach, but the person's coming back upstairs and the dog happens to be in a gated area, that the reinforcement should be available so that the client can just easily reach in there, and as they're going up the stairs, they know they're going to be walking by the dog's gate. So two things could happen. The dog could charge the gate because the owner hasn't done enough reinforcing or conditioning in that context, or the owner will be prepared to be like, okay, I'm coming by, there's a treat for you, boom, a couple of treats go in, and there's your moment of building equity in that relationship. So if the more you set the humans up for success, the more you're setting the dog up for success. Going back to the support network too. So what I mean by that is, just like the dog that's have separation anxiety and aggression, we've got to have other outlets for this. So much like a intra-household dog-dog aggression case, sometimes we want to take one of the dogs out of the equation for a little bit to give everybody a stress relief, let the dogs heal sometimes if they've had injuries. But the same thing can work with dog to owner aggression. So we might need to get the dog out of the home, whether it's a dog daycare for the day, if the dog can go there, to a relative's house if the dog is good there, giving opportunities for some relief for both the owner that the dog has issues with, and the dog. It's really important to see success in those cases. So here's a video showing you just a little bit of the strategy I use. Again, it's not an exhaustive case from start to finish, but it's showing you this dog had issues with the owners, both owners, but more towards the female owner, and you'll see her coming out, and you'll see that conditioned emotional response from the dog. This dog had issues resource guarding as well, so guarding toys, couches. The male owner had issues with the female owner, so all kinds of things going on in this case. But you can see what we're looking for when we do this process. And reinforcement is available for her in many rooms of the house where she doesn't have to go past the dog to go to the kitchen to come back to give the dog a treat. Those things are available for her at any time. And another important variable to consider is how afraid that particular owner is of the dog. again, if somebody's really afraid of the dog, that's not very fair to the human side of the equation as well. So sometimes we have to do a little bit more discussion about that to make sure that everybody really is on board. Because if somebody's really afraid, sometimes they're not going to participate. They're just it's going to be too much for them to even participate in trying to establish a relationship with the dog or help out. And in those cases, we've of course got to talk about overall prognosis and what can happen as an outcome. So remember that as a side note. Here's another example of owner-directed aggression. So I'll let you watch this video. So that dog Mia has an issue with the son. So that's the owner's son that is home most of the time right now, goes back and forth to college, but he is home a lot. And that's difficult because he's got to be able to come down to the kitchen, very open floor plan as well. And so what do you do there? So again, lots of work establishing trust and making sure we're managing the environment really well. Because again, he could come down the stairs, toss treats, and then go back up, and she'd probably be like, okay, that was not bad. But then if he comes down the stairs, opens the gate, and doesn't toss treats, and we haven't set the stage for success, we're undoing all of that work. So a lot of it boils down to management strategies in the beginning. So you can see some initial work here being done by Jill.
You can just see the super fast head whip there. Super fast, like there he is, head turn back, so.
Go ahead and toss her some food. Good, nice toss.
So.
Don't hand feed, just toss.
Good coaching on your part there, so not hand feeding yet, just tossing.
Yes.
So in that video, we're doing a combination of things. We're marking the dog and reinforcing the dog for noticing the sun in the home. We're doing some very basic counter conditioning there where the son is tossing treats. And you don't move into that step at first. In a lot of cases, sometimes you want to start with the owner the dog has the bond with, and that person can be feeding treats for noticing the other person in the home. So you have distance there. So sometimes you need a lot more distance than what you're seeing in this video. And then, of course, the goal is closing distance with the other person tossing treats, and then the other person being almost the exclusive one to toss treats to the dog. And then, of course, adding in the other stimuli that the dog has issues with. There's a little more work here. You can see a little more progress with Jill.
And Lucas is doing, you're doing a great job coaching him, but he's doing such a great job learning the body language that's going from that he's giving. That's funny. So he does that right there. I mean, it's beautiful. Which is going to make him feel more comfortable. Good girl.
And you see the video, just so you know, so you see the video hopping around. That's actually me on the moving the cursor of the video around. Here's a little update or great video of some of the interaction between Lucas and Mia now.
She actually just came over to you on her own, huh?
This is the first time this has ever happened, ever. Hi, girl. Good girl.
So the key is gradual introductions with that person the dog is having issues with. And that's really important. And the only way to do that successfully is for good management. So if the home itself cannot be managed well, you have to come up with alternative strategies, whether it's the dog going somewhere else, whether it's meeting at the park with that owner, so there can be enough distance. Just like any other stranger danger case, we've got to set things up. We wouldn't ever consider having a stranger just come over and be like, okay, come over for working with this dog and just now stay in the home forever, right? Because we're going to be exposing the dog to a stimulus at way higher levels of intensity than what that dog should be exposed to. Speaking of thresholds, what about dogs where thresholds are unmanageable? So somebody lives in the city or somebody lives in an environment where they can't manage the threshold. So threshold meaning the point at which the dog perceives a stimulus that's being too intense. So the dog starts barking and lunging once they hit that threshold, or they display the undesirable behavior when they see that particular stimulus. So I'm defining threshold as that was when we're seeing the observable behaviors indicating the dog's having a problem. There's different definitions for threshold, but I'll use that for the sake of this presentation. So with all threshold issues, meaning when it comes to difficulty controlling the environment, we can't keep the dog on a threshold because of the environment. It's just so difficult to control. So think of your city environments where distance isn't possible. Somebody lives in a high-rise building, they're coming up and down. What do we do there? So that's when I bring in my veterinary friends, because meds, as Dr. Amy Pike mentioned earlier, can be very, very helpful for these cases. They essentially buy you distance. They buy you the distance you need. So 200 feet away for one dog without any meds can now be there fine 50 feet away or 20 feet away. It gives us some leeway for helping that dog. It also, in my experience, helps with the intensity of the dog's reaction. So a dog that might be foaming at the mouth, barking and lunging and really going after a stimulus, it can help to reduce that, which also helps the owner because they're not quite as embarrassed or nervous about their dog because they're seeing less intensity in the dog's reaction to. And I mentioned situational meds, of course, that can be added on with the dosing meds or the loading meds that Amy was talking about. Calming caps, some people may not have heard that, but it's something that temporarily blocks some of the visual stimulus. It doesn't completely block everything out, but it reduces the intensity of visual stimuli. That's a hard sell for a lot of clients because it looks kind of strange on the dog, but it can be really, really helpful for dogs that you're in an environment where there's just this overwhelming cascade of stimuli. It's very difficult for those dogs. So if we can reduce some of that, that can buy us a lot of help because the dog is not constantly overwhelmed. Of course, you want to desensitize and condition the dog to wearing that first before you bring them out in the real world, just like any other equipment you would use. Great for car rides, great for getting the dog and the dogs that have issues with things going by while the dog's in the car if you don't have another type of visual blocker that you can use. Environmental blockers are things like the umbrella you see in the picture or cars or something you can quickly get behind so the dog can't actually see the stimulus. So I find umbrellas can be very helpful for not only the dog I'm working with. So say I see other dogs coming. If I have the umbrella, I can just guide that in front of the dog's visual so they can't see those dogs walking by. And it sounds kind of strange. Again, you've got this umbrella waving around, but it can be so helpful. And it's great for the dogs that are off leash coming at your on leash dog. So if you need to block those dogs away or block your own dog's visual stimulus or even block the other dogs from seeing your dog's signals, it can be very, very helpful. Now, of course, you want to, just like the calming cap or any other equipment, you want to desensitize and condition your dog to hearing that umbrella opening, seeing it opening, seeing it being near them. You don't want to add added stress, of course, to the situation by popping open an umbrella for the first time and waving it around and everything. So, and then alternative activities for dogs that have issues with thresholds. We can often replace the situations or the environments or the need for that dog to go for walks with other enrichment activities. So you don't have to take the dog around 5 blocks in the city or 10 blocks in the city. Give them an alternative activity. Training in the home, nose work in front of the high rise, keep the environment smaller so it's less intimidating for the dog while you're working through that behavior change strategy. So I always recommend having those alternative activities that you can suggest to the client. Again, whether it's nose work, training, puzzle toys, there's so many different things. Driving the dog to the park rather than walking to the park, if that means going by the really tough area where the dog has issues with. And, being creative with how we can replace the walk or the activity that the dog has issues with. So with this particular issue, when the dog's over threshold, it's all about handling. It really makes a difference how you handle the dog in these environments. So good defensive handling in these environments is going to go a long way. What you use in the environments can really help mitigate the dog from going over threshold. So here's a good example of just me using a couple cars. This is downtown Mystic, and this is me working with Castagna, who has issues with little dogs. I mean, a little dog just happens to pop up conveniently under the dog sign here in the Black Dog Company that's in Mystic, and you'll see me use the cars and a slow feeder to get the dog's or keep her attention focused on me. So good handling is all about using the environment, using the leash correctly. You can see I'm using food and a food tube there, which is a duration feeder, meaning she's going to be more focused on the food rather than just one treat. Because if you're using treats, which is great, it's just also you've got a moment of when I've given the dog a treat and then I reach for my treat pouch again. There's that split second of duration where they might be like, oh, let me see what else is going on while Mike goes to get that treat, because humans are much slower than me eating. And she might notice that white dog. So duration feeding is using the food tube to keep them focused. Really great for veterinary exams, elevators, anytime you need to just keep the dog's focus on something momentarily. It's a great way to distract the dog. So you're not getting, of course, the benefits of classical counter conditioning because she didn't even notice that small dog, but that's okay because in some environments, you're risking going over threshold if you're too close. So until you get to that stage, of course, your goal is to be able to walk right by other dogs. You want to manage that because if she barks and lunges at that small white dog, they're going by anyways. And she's going to be like, well, that worked. You just keep doing that. So management on defensive handling can be really helpful. Here's another video example of how to use food to, again, in a defensive handling way. So again, you're not getting much counter conditioning benefits here because the dog's not seeing the stimulus on the other side of the street. But you do get benefits of when you feed in the grass and you're allowing the dog to use its olfactory senses and get a little quick sniff break and getting that sensory input of just sniffing for treats in the grass rather than dealing with the dog on the other side of the street. So you see how where I drop the treats. If you drop the treats in a manner that keeps the dog going in that direction, it's kind of the same as a duration feeder. You keep them going in a certain or looking in a certain direction. They're not going to turn around and look back to see the other dog. So you can see in the direction I'm going there, her tail is pointing towards the other dog, and I'm just basically putting treats in a way that I know her head's going to just keep going after those. So again, it's a defensive handling technique, not necessarily a training scenario for that particular context. And here's one where you can use the slow feeder and your body as a visual block. So you can stand in a way that if something's coming, you've got your body blocking the visual stimulus, much like you would use a car or anything else in the environment that does to temporarily block the dog's view of that particular stimulus. That's also a good one for if you have a dog that's shy of people or you don't want people coming up to your dog. It's kind of the universal don't pay attention to me because I've got my back turned to you type of signal. So I find that also can be helpful if for my clients that are a little bit shy or don't want to say, don't pet my dog, or people just kind of come up and try to reach and they feel kind of bad saying, don't touch my dog. So it can really help the humans as well deal with those situations. Okay, so number 7, final one on the list here, is when the client's emotional bank account is empty. So I'm borrowing that term from Susan Friedman. When they have very little left in their tank to continue working with their dog. So either they've been bitten by a dog, it's a recent severe incident with their dog, or they're seeing regressions in behavior. So we see dogs that you're doing well and all of a sudden something bad happens for the client. That could be sometimes really draining on that emotional bank account. Maybe it's other stressors in the client's life, and we've seen a lot of that this year, of course. A lot of other things going on that can take a toll on that client's stress. And the last thing sometimes is they want to see more aggressive behavior from their dog. And that's going to often fracture that human-animal bond, right? They're, especially in owner-directed aggression cases. You know, a lot of people went out in the pandemic and they adopted dogs, or they brought dogs home from rescues because they were looking for that mutual comfort. You know, I mean, comfort a dog, dog's going to comfort me. It's going to help me through this pandemic. And the next thing you know, they're getting bitten by their own dog. That doesn't feel good, and that can really often make it difficult for us as trainers and consultants to try to steer that back in the right direction. So certainly, this is what it can feel like and look like for some clients. You know, the incidents are recent, severe. You get this, especially when there's regression too. So I talked about that regression. When clients see that progress, they think it's going to keep going in the right direction. They might think that's how behavior works. So one of the things I always recommend is make sure during the first consult or first time you're talking with those clients that there can be regressions, so that they know that that's a possibility for that to happen, that regressions can be almost normal in some cases. So good communication, setting expectations with clients ahead of time can really mitigate the risk for a lot of the things you're seeing in this list, because stress stacking is a thing for humans as well. So what are the solutions here? What do we do in these cases? And this is much more of a human consulting side of things than, of course, the dog behavior side of things. Always look for empathy first, meaning you've got to respond with empathy, because these clients, many of them are desperate. They're in a point of desperation. And so if we don't respond empathetically and give them awareness that we understand what they're going through, and certainly many trainers and consultants really do understand, because a lot of us started with our own dogs that had issues, and that's how you became a trainer, right? So we understand this empathy side of things. We can empathize with the clients, and that's really important because they're often at a low. So next step is to recharge that bank account. Find out what they like to do with their dogs. What are the things that make them happy with their dogs? What situations and scenarios happen during the day that make them smile with their dogs or make them smile at their dog? Because nobody's really, as they say, no dog's aggressive 100% of the time. Most of the times you hear clients, he's good 99% of the time, but... So focus on that other 99% first to really remind the client that there's a lot of good things with this dog, and there's a lot of things we can do to repair this relationship. And of course, then you can talk to them about how we can continue to work on what's damaging the relationship and work on those issues. And the next thing I focus on then is what's the overall outlook. So I'm going to be honest with clients. If I feel that it's not going to be successful, we do have to be realistic with them. We do have to give those realistic expectations. Ethically, we have to make sure we're giving them what we feel is a realistic outcome. But when we have clients that are maybe teetering on that, running on fumes in that emotional bank account, typically in my experience, there is a better outlook than what they're experiencing. So I will revisit the prognosis, revisit the overall picture in their case, and rebuild that outlook. Let them know the outlook is better than probably what they're thinking at that moment. And then when you get to that step, you need to give immediate and effective recommendations to start to change things. And that usually is management, some sort of management that's going to be immediate and effective. So if it's like I was talking about some of these other difficult cases and scenarios, what kind of management strategies can we use? Is it the dog that's going after the nanny that we need to get out of the home during the day she's there? That can be immediate and effective for management side of things, but it can make the client feel much better if we do that. If it's an owner-directed aggression case in the home, it has to be immediate and effective. What can we do to immediately change things and help that client feel better in that case? Is it getting the dog out of the home for part of the day? Is it rearranging things in the house? I've had clients that literally had to move bedrooms in the house, and they're okay with doing that for the time being if it's going to be an immediate and effective strategy. So really look at the overall, what you can change in the environment that's going to set everybody up for success. So that's my little presentation on troubleshooting in aggression cases, and I'm going to leave my contact info up there for a moment, and then we're going to jump into Q&A. So we'll see you there in just a moment.